are very welcome along to a special Saturday panel live here at Lansdowne Road. We are in the Leia Healthcare Lounge. They do cheer. That's at least treble, it sounds like there. It is all with thanks to Leia Healthcare, health and wellness partner to Leinster Rugby, who are celebrating their new It's Good to Live campaign. Now, a very special panel. Keith Wood is with us this afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hugo McNeil.
Good afternoon.
And Andy Dunn.
Afternoon.
Dave McIntyre just described it as 3 generations of Irish rugby, which does beg the question, Andy, which was the first generation amongst the 2 men beside you?
I look a little bit older than Hugo, but I can just tell you he's significantly older than I am. I think he's 2 generations away from me, actually. Yeah.
Hugo, you had a wonderful career with Ireland, with playing with the Lions, but when you look at these big European days for Leinster, and when you think back to the big European nights for Munster, is that ever a part of your career that there's a tinge of sadness that you never got to experience these European days?
Yeah, you'd love to have played in games like this, and I think there's a lot of challenges about the professional game as opposed to the game that we had. It was kind of easier in some senses that you could work, you go to college, you have a job, the 2 lives were easier to sort of knit together. But the 2 things that I'd love to have done differently. One was probably trained like an athlete, properly, as opposed to the way we probably sort of trained. But the second
how did you train?
Well, it was too much probably long distance running, and there wasn't enough of power and flexibility. And now if you look at the way the guys train, it's they get maximum benefit from the time. But the other big thing was I'd love to have played for Leinster in the European Cup, and sort of following as everybody has done the sort of great story, the European Cup story that Keith and Munster sort of built up. Well, Ulster with their initial win, and then the Munster whole odyssey, and then driving Leinster and Leinster fans mad because you were inevitably compared with Munster, and then egging on Leinster to go do what they did, and then them egging on this fantastic dynamic that you have within the Irish teams. And
the interprovincials though back then, what sort of crowds would you have?
Probably as many as there is in this box at the moment.
I was going to say crowds is actually a misnomer.
Exactly.
I played a game against Woody in, I think it was maybe 99, 2000 in Donnybrook, Leinster versus Munster. I might have my year wrong, but I think there was 1,800 people at Leinster, Munster, and about 27 internationals. I felt like I was the only non-international on the field. Can you remember that one?
I do. I remember that because that was the week, 4 or 5 days after the disgrace in Lens when we lost the World Cup against Argentina, and to be honest now, we kind of had a couple of days on the beer in depression after that, and Declan Kidney said, you don't have to play if you don't want to, all of you. Make your decision at lunchtime on Friday. It was a Friday night game, if I remember correctly. Make your decision at lunchtime on Friday. So we turned up on Friday, and we all said, do you know what? All individually, let's go and play. And this is we need to get back out in the field. Anybody who'd played, get back on the horse, whatever. And we ate Leinster alive the same day. It was
Munster win, we'll say.
It was a great one. Raj threw me a kind of buckety pass, and I picked it up off my toes. I don't know what I was doing, able to catch it at that stage, but I ran, and to his eternal shame, I sidestepped Gordon Darcy and scored from the halfway, which was kind of cool. So I felt good about myself about 4 days after feeling really miserable. But it was funny when Hugo started talking about he'd like to have had it. I had both. So the first half of my career was amateur. And really amateur, I'd say, and it was only really as we got past maybe 99 that we got to the real sense of professionalism. We're trying to figure out what was going to happen, and nobody really knew. And it's kind of funny when you look at it 20 years hence as to what the game has become. I'm laughing at you. You're talking about flexibility. I don't believe in flexibility myself. We just never did any of that either. So it isn't as if it went automatically to professional. Professional is a state of mind. It isn't just because you're getting paid. And it took a long period of time to get that. And I'm laughing at it for all the GA guys that were around that were incredibly professional in terms of some of the training that they would have done. That was professional before we were, and yet we were getting paid. So it was a kind of unusual idea. Now the guys that are out there they're just, they're finely tuned. They're not playing a fraction of the games that were being played. That's when we were playing.
How many games a season would you have played?
At the most in professional times I played was 42. And I averaged 37 over 5 years, or 35 over 5 years during that professional period of time. But when I started playing for Garryowen, and I would play, I was maybe 19, I was 18, I played my first senior game. John Mitchell was my number 8, the New Zealand player was my number 8 in my first game. But the following season I was playing All-Ireland League on a Saturday. I was playing under 20 on a Sunday at Openside, and then every couple of weeks I was playing Junior Cup, because you could play Junior Cup and Senior Cup in the 1 year.
Right.
So it was kind of crazy. I don't know how many matches I played then, but a lorry load of them, and it was kind of fine because you weren't training all that hard, and it wasn't. I will say that by the end of rugby, when, before I got injured at the last year, I was shattered all the time. The training just took so much out of you. And yes, you thought it was great that you were able to train it, but you're just knackered like all the time. And so I was kind of quite happy to stop then at the end of it.
I'd say you would have been quite a professional amateur, though.
Yeah, I was lucky
you looked after
play.
yourself.
Yeah, and I was actually lucky to play in a period where there was a very strong Irish team. That from not having won a championship, from when I sort of started, we hadn't won a championship since 30 years, and to have a situation where you win sort of 2 and 3, in 3 years or 4 years, and share another one. So it was great. And so a lot of the players that was actually played with, when you think about like Ollie Campbell and Trevor England and Philip Matthews and otherwise, these were guys who would have, if they played in the modern game, I think have done very well. And so there was a sort of as you say, a kind of professional attitude, especially playing for Ireland, that you didn't need to be paid for to.
We see at the moment with the academies throughout Ireland, particularly in Leinster, they're well linked in with the colleges. Even the most experienced players, guys with 70, 80 Ireland caps, are back in college doing masters, they're doing their degrees, they're looking after the other side of their life as well. If it was professional, do you think you would have been as successful in your life outside of rugby if you'd been a professional rugby player?
You just couldn't have done the number of things. You couldn't go to, spend time in university. I had a great time in Trinity. I went and spent a few years in Oxford as well, which made friends that I have all over the world. I just couldn't have done that. I was at the varsity match in London last week, and there's no frontline players playing in that. So I think there's a sort of something that you give up. And I think I think it's great in recent years is that the players have also thought about what are they going to do afterwards. Because I think when rugby went professional, I mean, a lot of people sort of thought, well, this is going to be like soccer and get a professional career. This is, it's completely different. There's probably less than 1% of players playing rugby now who could financially stop when they finish and actually say, I'm financially independent. Not that you want to be financially independent, maybe in the ages of sort of 30, and you're all one tackle away from your career being ended. And so I think, there was a few years ago, and I remember when you meet people who were, sort of playing professional in their early 20s, and you said, think about what you're going to do afterwards. It was like you'd said, you're going to get some life insurance or a pension. They'd kind of look at you. And I always remember thinking it would only be when the guys coming into the dressing room see the guys who were the legends of the dressing room and see them afterwards when they'd finished, and often had, it was kind of quite challenging, that they would actually sort of get into it themselves. And there's been great work being done in support of what was sort of Arupa and other Rugby Players Association, and more players are thinking about life after rugby, because it's not going to be, you're not going to be. It's not like a soccer. If you have a career in a Premier League team or a championship team for a number of years, and you have somebody who's halfway sensible to advise you'll probably create financial independence. Rugby is not that sport.
Yeah, we spoke, was it probably 10 days ago, about the Leinster Academy, and I was making the point that maybe the Leinster Academy was becoming the Academy of Ireland, and I think you were saying, well, they probably wouldn't be too happy to hear that down in Munster and Connacht and Ulster. But Jerry Thornley has a piece in the Irish Times today where he talks about the Leinster squad and them being the Ajax of rugby now, with the amount of players that are coming through. 18 of the 23 that played last week have come through the Leinster Academy, going through the countless players who were at the other provinces who maybe have only had 1 year at the Leinster Academy. Andy, what are they doing that is, like, I feel like we should be incredibly proud of what Leinster are doing, because it seems as though it is a world leading. It's not just the best in Ireland, it's probably the best academy right now in world rugby.
It's their attention to detail at the levels where it's not seen by the media. I covered a school's under 13 Castleknock College game as a physiotherapist about a year ago, and there was 2 guys in Leinster coats at the game. and they were there eyeing, who's a potential guy to come through into their under 14s, trialists, sub academy, sub academy. I mean, I couldn't get over the fact there was two guys there, and it wasn't an important game. It wasn't an under 14s or under 13s cup match. It was a Wednesday afternoon friendly, and I think if you take that attention to detail, that discipline that they've brought into their structure in terms of they don't let talented players slide through the net. It just doesn't happen. So they're capitalising on a very strong school setup that's always been there from before when Hugo was playing and when from beyond. And it's you've essentially got 10 to 12 academies that are feeding into an academy. I mean, every Blackrock, St Michael's, Terranure, Belvedere, Clongowes, just to name off the top of my head, these guys are highly tuned athletes just from the fact that they're getting well coached in school. Then they're getting into the upper echelons of what is the start of professional sport. But they're very prepared and ready to hit the ground running. So, I mean, the numbers just alone, if you compare that to the Munster schools set up or the Connacht schools set up, it's vastly superior just because of the numbers in Leinster.
I think that's the whole key. And, and it has always been like this. And I remember, when going to England and, talking to people at Oxford or at London Irish, and you saw there wasn't a replica of the sort of the Schools Cup that there was here, and particularly the Leinster, as Peter Smith said, it's just physically larger, sort of, than the Eastern Seaboard than other players. It was just so important, that tournament, that competition. And I remember still when playing, probably the single greatest moment of rugby life, and I was lucky to play for Ireland and the Lions, but was just out here on this pitch in the extra time, at the end of extra time in 1977, when we won the Schools Cup against St Mary's, and asking the referee how much time is left, and he's saying there's none. And I, having been knocked out in the first round the year before, and having gone through a school like Blackrock, which has a lot of tradition, like a lot of the big schools, was so huge. And I've seen probably 7 Schools Cup games in the last couple of years, and a lot of them are on sort of TV now. And I haven't seen a bad game. And the sort of the standard that there is in the sort of the Leinster schools rugby, right across, and it's way now beyond teams like Blackrock, and you see teams like Ross Gray, but winning it a couple of years ago. It is so good, and that's what has produced this system. And Jerry was just staggering, the number of players that are playing for Ulster and for playing in Munster as well. But I remember talking to Stuart Lancaster soon after he came here, who would be very, very familiar with the English system, and he said he just couldn't get over the sort of the Leinster school system and the conveyor belt of talent that it is actually producing. And what that is meaning is that Leinster, can compare and compete with other teams in other places that have huge financial backers, in a way that probably they couldn't otherwise.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd love to say it was cyclical, and it's not. And I think there always was a huge number of players that were coming through the Leinster school system, and they do get a higher level of professional coaching because a lot of the coaches are ex-players that come in through it, and are teachers that have rugby as one of their central tenets that they want to support, and all the things that it gets from it. And it's funny when you go all the way back to what rugby was, almost from those, let's say, Victorian times to the sort of Corinthian principles of what rugby was to have this hard game that was taxing on the players, that built up on teamwork and had a value system that was built into it. That is fantastic, and it's lovely. We kind of forget that sometimes, but that wasn't set up for professional rugby. That was set up to have the kids, give them a good balance, so when they left school that they understood the sense of team and the sense of hard work and performance and all those sort of things, which is brilliant. In professional rugby, it's a different setup. So it's, how does that fit in exactly? And the actual structure of the Leinster school system, and the amount of teams that are in it, and the amount of strong teams that are in it, and the money that goes into it, to be honest, has ensured that they have jumped the gun on everybody else. And so I wasn't reacting to it the other day. I was just saying, not the other team, the other provinces wouldn't like it. All the other provinces have to have a look at what Leinster are doing. They can't copy it because they don't have that structure in place. So they have to be innovative and do something slightly different to make certain that, take Munster as an example, that Munster can start channeling the players in through it. And I listen to Donner's point of the guys in the Leinster coach. That does happen down in Munster as well. You don't have the same amount of kids being dropped into the hopper to see what quality comes out at the end, but there is plenty, and it is moving on. But as it moves on, Leinster is moving on. But there's an awful lot going on behind the scenes, and I think in terms of what will happen from now and here on in, there are elements that will be cyclical, where you'll get a group of guys that come through at one period of time. And if you go back for when I was involved with Ireland first, we had a group of players that were pretty good, and then suddenly you get dropped in a 9 and a 10 from Prez with Stringer and Rog. Stringer still playing now. Do you see all those naked photos in the Sunday Times?
Yes,
pretty amazing today. Now he's very reminiscent of my own body. So they came in. You suddenly had a chunk of Anthony Foley was in maybe a couple of years before that. There was a chunk of players that were kind of in there. Then Quinney and Leamy and Wallace. There was a group of players that came in. They all started coming in around the same time. We haven't had that flood of our group of 4 or 5 players coming in at once in the last number of years, and they've all come through for the Leinster system. So I would be, as you said, we should be proud of it. I'd be absolutely proud of it. But I want some of that for Munster as well. And I don't think there's any doubt that that'll be the nature it'll go. And it becomes incredibly difficult for Connacht now, because they have so few teams that come in through it, and that is one of the issues that they have.
Why do you think, Woody, is it like the names that you mentioned are all these iconic sort of Munster players? Most of them were forwards, and obviously, Peter Stringer and Sings and Rog were halfbacks. That if I kind of think about, since I was playing, which was a long time ago, where there's a lot of Munster forwards, front row, second row, back row, halfbacks would have been absolutely nailed down number one when you were playing. Paul O'Connell, Donald Callahan, all of those guys. But there hasn't been any three-quarters or full-backs. There's been many who have played for Ireland from Munster, but there's none who've been in the same category of when you were automatically going to be, or where Ronan was going to automatically be in. And since Michael Kiernan, and Michael played when I was playing, so I'm just kind of wondering why, the Munster system is, throwing out so many great forwards and halfbacks.
In many respects, I used to give my slightly agricultural view when I started playing rugby, that the Munster guys were just a little bit fatter. The Ulster guys were incredibly fit, and the Leinster guys were somewhere in between the two, and that's what it was. We're talking 23, 4, 5 years ago. That is actually true. That's what it was. We were all a bit kind of rough and tumble, a little bit agricultural. So the forward suited us down to the ground, and the game was. It was tougher then. Now, it's harder now, but it was a tough game then. And I think that suited us. Playing against Leinster suited us all the time. And Leinster schools were really, really good in around our time. But I remember playing Blackrock in under 19, coming out of school. We just wiped the floor with them because we were just tougher. Their backs were far better rugby players than we were. They couldn't get their hands on the ball.
Was that where the pride was when you were growing up?
100%. And we would expect our forwards to do really well, and we would expect all of that sort of stuff. And and that's where some of those cycles kind of come in. But I don't think we're in a cycle at the moment. And it isn't just the schools. It is the UCD. And the way they've become an academy, and then the Leinster Academy on the back of that. You're getting players fitter, stronger, faster, a couple of years earlier than in the other provinces. They get their chance a little bit early. I actually think it's great, and the rest of us have to up our game.
The very interesting point as regards the academy and what Leinster are doing and the spreading it around, because it's enabling Irish rugby to compete more internationally, where other forces are, particularly the money that is now coming through television, is making it tougher. So if you look at, for example, the money that is going into like the Pro 12 or now the Pro 14 was sharing TV money of 14 million euros going into 18 euros with the South Africans. The Aviva Premiership in England is sharing 53 million pounds among the teams. The top 14 in France is sharing 76 million, going to 90 million. And the reason that is that rugby has just found itself as the battle for media companies, Sky, BT, against the people who are trying to sell you, your landline, your Wi-Fi, your internet, your content. And that's just simply because England and France have populations that are so larger. And you kind of think that's a huge financial disparity. But when you take it over 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, What it's going to mean is that the English and the French clubs are going to have enormous sort of financial firepower. And so it's so important that the sort of the Irish system is this, we're never going to have as many people in there, so that the TV rights are never going to be as big. We may get asked to join up with the English or something, which is another sort of a separate thing. But what that has meant is that the Irish system has been able to compete in a way, as you look at Scottish or Welsh clubs or Italian clubs. I mean, you look at the sort of the European Cup, there's been 6 Irish winners, there's been 3 beaten finalists. God knows we wouldn't have many beaten semi-finalists there's been. There has never been a Scottish finalist in the European Cup. There has been 1 Scottish semi-finalist, Edinburgh against Ulster here a couple of years ago. There's never been a Welsh winner. There's never been an Italian team that has actually got out of its pool. And so it's so important that faced with this, and it's very difficult. We've tried to bring in 2 teams, South African teams, into the Pro 12. Well, that's kind of tough. We're talking about American teams. So the people who are around it are doing absolutely everything they can. And why it's so important that this system, that is with the Irish clubs being strong, that we have a situation like last weekend, where the Irish teams beat the big English teams and Ulster again last night. And so the school system and that this talent is just so important.
And so important as well that we keep the players here as examples of what can be achieved. And such an important day yesterday. First Tadhg Furlong signed up for 3 years. I think the expectation was he was always going to stay, but it seems he got full value as well with his contract. And then the news that Peter O'Mahony is staying for 3 years. Was there a genuine fear that actually Peter O'Mahony may be tempted?
I think there should be a fear for every player, because when you start talking some of the telephone numbers that the guys will get offered, there should be a fear from it. And like we've discussed this often, Nathan, on it, you just have to look at the whole package. You have to look at everything that's going on. So I would accept the fact that we need to have a great school system and the other provinces need to up their game, right? That needs to happen. It's essential. We have more players of quality. Some different types of players brought into the system. Absolutely, we need to do that. We need to then show them what the player welfare program is like over a 10-year period, and that can be fantastic. We need to be able to look after the players in that idea, because it's the only major professional game, fully professional game, in Ireland is rugby. We need to be able to stand behind that an awful lot. And then the last side of it is we need to be in a position to where we can support the people that give so much joy and happiness, and the 40 or 50,000 that we'll have in here today together. We need to be able to support those guys afterwards. And Andy's talking earlier on about being as a physiotherapist and some of the school sort of stuff, and he set up his new business in Dublin, which is fantastic, and we need to support it. And it isn't that rugby needs to support it, because it's everybody needs to support it, and that's the full package. That's saying that we maximise whatever we can do for the kids. And I would add something else on in terms of that. When we look at all the health and the fitness that we do for the kids that are in those schools, we need to be able to extend that out to all the kids in that school, not just to perform for international sport, but to be the healthiest and the fittest and all that sort of stuff. They're all the kind of knock-ons. We need to look for extra things that rugby can give back to it. So we look after the players there. We look after the players when they're playing, where they're not playing too many matches. They might be playing 24 matches. They might be getting a proper rest. They're not running to the ground. They're kept really fit. The physiotherapy level is very, very high. And then we try and give them support structures afterwards, because I remember, just going back to one of the points, when I joined Quins, Jim Staples was playing. And I remember the amount of money I was on in Quins was very similar to the amount of money I was on in the bank over here. And
Munster Rugby have done a phenomenal job. I mean, if you kind of look at over the sort of the period that we sort of lost, well, sort of, Johnny went, Sexton went, and then he came back, and Ian Madigan went, and Marty Moore came, and he's now sort of come back. And if you compare it with some of the other countries, you look at what's happening to South Africa as well. So I think it's been phenomenal in terms of keeping the players here. But I think it's really important, in addition to what Keith has made, the excellent points, that the teams need to be competitive and they want to win. Johnny went to Racing when it was no good. Johnny was a 3 times European, Cup winner. He's, just competitive. You could say, I'm getting a big check, but I remember watching when people talk about the Northampton game, the first Northampton game that Leinster, won so well. I remember turning on the next day to watch Johnny playing for Racing in an absolute shambles, and so it was probably lucky for us that Johnny went to Racing when in the condition that they were in, not too long, when he might have won a European Cup and brought Jamie Heaslip and Sean O'Brien with them, and that could have been different. But I think the RFU and the Bronzes have done a great job in keeping them here. It's going to be tough, kind of financially, but having them the sharp end of the tournaments, particularly the European Cup, is crucial.
We have one advantage against, say, the English-Welsh setups, the French setups, is that from a socio-economic point of view, most professional rugby players who are in Irish rugby at 19 or 20 have been educated. The education system is excellent. Their capacity to make decisions, to read situations, to communicate, it's a high level, and it's very, very important. If you consider what Woody and Hugo have spoken about their careers, where they had it was transitional or crossover periods between professional or not. The one thing we've got to be careful about is your modern day professional who hasn't had life outside of rugby can live inside this little bubble, and I've certainly been in it. I mean, people used to encourage me back in whatever 2003, 2004. What are you doing outside of training? Because we'd be home by 1:30 and be watching Neighbours and playing the computer, and suddenly like 7 years had passed, and I was like, what have I done every afternoon for 7 years? You played in a game that Leinster Rugby put up on Twitter, a photo from 1980 yesterday, and it was Leinster against Romania, and great photos. Everybody's a different shape. There's not many muscles on view, but there's a lot of guys who were working in professions and who had high pressure jobs and were able to go out in the field and express themselves, make decisions. I think Frank Quinn got a drop goal as a winger from the touchline in that game, I was told. So that type of stuff has gone away from rugby. You're probably never going to see a winger take a drop goal from the touchline, that capacity to express yourself in the field, because the game has become so homogenised. You train a lot, you're given structures. It's very, very difficult for players to go outside, think outside the box and be expressive. But I do think the fact that young players coming through the system into Irish rugby are educated, have had a life away from the sport, as opposed to English football, where a 14-year-old goes over, doesn't get educated, gets turfed out at 19, 20. That's a different environment altogether.
Well, even Raheem Sterling, in an interview in the Sunday Times last week, and now Raheem Sterling is going to be on 250 grand a week, so ultimately he's going to be fine money-wise, but said it's only in the past year under Pep Guardiola that he was doing exactly what you said. He finished training every day at 12:30, and he went home and he sat in front of the PlayStation for 6 hours. Didn't think about anything, where suddenly now he's going out, he's meeting people, he's doing a little bit of coaching with kids, he's getting involved in stuff outside of just football, just to keep his brain active.
Well, at the end of my career, the last couple of years, I'd had a few injuries, and I'd always worked, which was fine. When I went over to England in '96, I set up a marketing company because I just wanted to know the business of sport. I was interested in it. I wanted to do the contracts myself, some of the commercial contracts. I wanted to work with the sponsors. I got to kind of understand the different things that were going on. That's what I had worked in the bank. So I'd been involved in the sponsorship of the Irish rugby team for Irish Permanent as a 20, 21-year-old. Okay. So it was a kind of a great thing to see all this going on. But I remember near the end of my time in Quinn's having an argument with the coach, because I decided I wanted to do, because my body, I couldn't do half the training the other guys were doing. I was trying to recover from surgery, and you need to be around for the rugby session. So I said, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to the gym at 7 in the morning, 6:37, and I'll do my gym work there. Then I'll go to the rugby match. Then I'll go and I'll work in the afternoon. And he said, no, you can't. You have to hang around. I said, I'm sorry, I'm not hanging around. And he said, well, you have to. I said, well, I'm not. So there you go. I kind of bullied him out of it anyway. And the CEO agreed with me. So that was fine, because the guys were playing PlayStation at the time, and I just didn't want to do that. I knew my time was up in a couple of years. I knew I wanted to work. I've spoken to a huge number of guys that have retired, and I think it's our group, and Andrew's, I don't know how many years younger than you are than me, but you're 10 years or whatever it is. So in that period of time, those guys have found it an awful lot harder. The guys that are there now, that are starting at 19 or 20, they're being told, you need to go and get a degree. if that's what suits you, or you need to have, you can't really do an apprenticeship, but you need to get job experience, you need to get access to further information, you need to try and expose yourself to the possibility of what can be in your future if you get injured tomorrow, or if you retire in 10 years' time, or whatever it is. So guys have to be able to focus and concentrate on two things at once, which is incredibly difficult. And the main reason it's difficult is because you need to make certain that nothing detracts from what you do on Saturday, and nothing. But for me, I remember Rog giving out to me years ago, because we were playing Ireland-England up here, and I had a business meeting on the Friday. And he said, "Should be concentrating on the game." You know, I said, this was my way of concentrating. I was able to relax doing it, because this was no stress for me. This is what I was used to all my life. Whereas he couldn't have seen that, having that conversation as something that would be normal for him, but it was normal for me.
Just before we leave this conversation then, Hugo touched on it, that this isn't a 1 year situation where the revenues coming to the English and French teams is well above what the Pro 14 teams are getting. And like Donald O'Callaghan was talking about going to Gloucester at one stage to check out his value, and they offered him slightly more than the IRFU, but he then understood, all right, the IRFU are getting there. Like when Peter O'Mahony, when Tadhg Furlong are going, the IRFU just cannot match their value. It could be double now. We could be heading towards a stage over the next 2-3 years where maybe the French clubs could offer treble the maximum. Do you see a situation maybe after the World Cup, when these contracts are running down, that we get to an All Blacks type scenario where players go for a year or two and then come back?
I wish I had that in my career. I may have played on an extra couple of years. It just wasn't really an option, and I had a lot of injuries, and I was always rushing back from injury to go and play, and then not really getting it. Tadhg Furlong is a different one for me. He's still a young prop. You know, he's not, even though he's, in my view, the best tight head in the world. I was very disappointed he wasn't shortlisted for World Player of the Year this year. I think he's a class player, but he's young, and he needs to have, you know, another few years, which he's signed a really good contract in there. Props tend to play for a long period of time. If he can get a great contract here, he may have an opportunity to go away for a period of time or whatever. We just need to be able to think in that fashion. We need not to be able to close the door entirely on somebody going away, or we close it for a year or two, say, actually, you can go, and we want you back after a while. This is your kind of your pension in the middle of your time. I don't know, we just have to look at things differently. It can't be this blanket, no way, and though that is necessary to try and protect what we have here. So it's, as I say, you have to be innovative in that as well, because we don't know what the actual route is for that.
We only have it, you know, each year it will cough up probably 3 to 4 cases where it's relevant. So why can't we just say, from a transparency point of view, we're not making a hard and fast rule, but Joe Schmidt, David Nucifora, whoever the provincial coaches, we're going to deal with it on a case by case basis and just leave it at that, because it is a case by case. It's not like Montpellier coming and offering €800,000 to a guy who's on Leinster A. They're just going to, you know, they're only going to go after the top end elite level Irish player, of which each year, between duration of contract, you know, all those things and variables that happen, it will raise its head 2-3 times a year. We don't need a rule.
But the problem is, there's going to be, with this cumulative amount of money going to the English and the French teams, we're talking 52 million a year and 76 going to 96, and that's 100 million over a couple of years. That's 140 million going to 180 million. It's not just going to be the top, English and French teams that are going to be coming and looking to buy our players, because it's going to be,
I think
they're going to be the money is going to be right throughout it.
I think it is, Hugo. Yeah. I can see it when you look at, yes, England are in a particular spot at the present moment in time where they have a good group of young players that are coming through. Now they have a chunk that are injured. How will that survive going forward? Same within France. There's a huge reaction against France for the manner in which their international team are playing, and mostly because their league is populated by players that are not available to play for France. Yeah. So I think there is to be careful not to kind of totally lose the run of ourselves in terms of that. They're both in a very difficult. Well, French rugby is in total state of chaos.
Absolutely. But it's going to be, they're still going out and offering the money to players, and I think it's been fantastic. Hopefully that the Tadhg Furlong and the Peter O'Mahony and hopefully CJ Stander will end up sort of playing here. But it's just, you've got to be vigilant. Just that number and the cumulative number, and speaking to people in France, speaking to people in the clubs, is that saying, just that financial firepower that they're going to have is going to make, again, going back to a sport, you go to the Pat Lam situation, I've got a fiduciary duty to my to my family, you're one tackle away from your career being ended. It's why it's so tough, and I have such admiration. And I think why it's so important that that we kind of really support as much as we can the players who are going to be playing for the provinces.
We are here at Lansdowne Road with thanks to Leia Healthcare, health and wellness partner to Leinster Rugby, who are celebrating their new It's Good to Live campaign. Full live coverage of Leinster against Exeter coming up at 3:15. We're going to start building up to that in just a moment, but first we've a text in from Lisa Marie in Greystones to 53106. Can you tell Bill Dominican, who's on his way from Greystones to the Aviva, that he's left his phone at home? It's not lost, it's not stolen, it's safe at home. Enjoy the match, Bill. We'll take a quick break.